The sky over the Arizona desert had been calm that morning, deceptively calm. The kind of stillness that old-timers warned meant something was coming. Caleb Morgan had been riding for 3 days, moving a small herd of cattle toward the trading post at Red Rock when he first felt the change in the air. The wind shifted, dropping from a steady breeze to nothing at all, and the temperature plummeted in a way that made no sense for the season. He looked to the west and saw it, a wall of black clouds rolling across the desert floor like a tidal wave, swallowing the mountains, the mesas, the very light itself. He had seen desert storms before, but nothing like this. He turned his horse and rode hard, abandoning the herd to their own instincts as the first winds began to lash at his face. The cattle would survive, they always did, but he would not if he stayed out in the open. The storm was moving faster than any he had ever witnessed, the air growing thick with dust and debris, the temperature dropping so fast he could feel the cold seeping through his duster. He pushed his horse up a narrow canyon, looking for any shelter, any overhang, any crevice that might offer protection from what was coming. His horse stumbled on the rocky ground, nearly throwing him, and in that moment of chaos, he saw it, a crack in the canyon wall, barely visible behind a curtain of desert brush. He dismounted and led his horse toward the opening, pushing aside the thorny branches that concealed it. Behind the brush was a narrow passage, just wide enough for a man and a horse to squeeze through, carved by wind and water over centuries. He pulled his horse inside as the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, turning the dust outside into mud within seconds. The passage opened into a cavern, not a natural cave, but something that had been shaped by human hands, its walls smoothed, its floor cleared of debris. And in the center of that cavern, gathered around a small fire that somehow still burned despite the wind, were 10 Apache women. They rose as one when he entered, their hands moving toward the knives at their belts, their eyes fixed on him with a wariness that spoke of a hard life and harder lessons. Caleb raised his hand slowly, showing them he meant no harm. "Just the storm," he said, his voice rough from the dust and wind. "I mean, you know trouble. I just need shelter until it passes." The women did not relax, but neither did they attack. They looked at one another, communicating in glances and small gestures that he could not interpret. The eldest among them, a woman with silver streaks in her black hair and a face that had seen more than 60 winters, stepped forward. "You are alone?" she asked, her English accented but clear. Caleb nodded, lowering his hands. "My herd's scattered. I just need a corner to wait out the storm. I'll be gone by morning." The older woman studied him for a long moment, her eyes moving over his face, his hands, the way he stood. Then she gave a small nod, and the other women relaxed, though they did not return to their seats immediately. "The storm will last the night," she said. "You may stay, but you will follow our rules." Caleb nodded again, leading his horse to the far end of the cavern where the animal could rest. He did not know it yet, but that simple nod had just bound him to something far greater than a night's shelter. The storm raged outside with a fury that shook the very walls of the cavern. Wind screamed through the narrow entrance like a wounded animal, and the sound of rain hammering against rock was deafening. Caleb sat with his back against the cavern wall, watching the women as they moved about their tasks. They did not speak to him, but neither did they ignore him. One brought him a bowl of stew, thick with beans and wild onions, and set it at his feet without a word. Another brought a blanket and laid it beside him. They treated him not as a guest, but as something else, something he could not quite name. He ate the stew slowly, feeling its warmth spread through his cold, stiffened limbs. As he watched the women, he began to notice things about them that had not been immediately apparent. They were not simply traveling together. They were organized, disciplined, moving with a purpose that spoke of shared purpose and shared loss. There were no children among them, no men, no elders, except the silver-haired woman who seemed to be their leader. They carried themselves like warriors, but their hands were calloused from work, not warfare. He wanted to ask questions, but something in the silence told him that questions would not be welcome. The storm showed no sign of letting up as the hours passed. The fire burned low, and one of the younger women rose to add more wood, casting a long shadow across the cavern wall. In that shadow, Caleb saw something he had missed before, a pattern of symbols painted on the stone, faded but still visible. He recognized some of them, Apache symbols, the kind he had seen on sacred sites across the territory. But others were unfamiliar, older perhaps, or from a tradition he did not know. He realized then that this was no simple shelter. This was a place of significance, a place where these women had come for a reason. The eldest woman saw him looking at the symbols and crossed the cavern to stand beside him. "You see them," she said. It was not a question. Caleb nodded slowly. "I've seen Apache markings before, but some of these I don't recognize." The woman was silent for a moment, her eyes moving across the ancient symbols. "They are from before the Apache," she said finally. "From the ones who came before. This place is old. Very old." She turned to look at him, and in the firelight, her face seemed both ancient and timeless. "My grandmother brought me here when I was a girl. She told me that one day, this place would choose a new guardian." Caleb felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. "I'm not looking to be anyone's guardian," he said carefully. "I'm just a cattle driver passing through." The woman smiled, and there was something in that smile that made him uneasy. "The storm does not bring everyone here," she said. "It brings only those who are meant to come." She gestured to the other women, who had stopped their tasks and were now watching him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. "We have been waiting, all of us, for someone to come." She looked at him, and her voice dropped to a whisper. "You are the one." Before Caleb could respond, the entrance to the cavern exploded inward. A section of rock gave way under the force of the storm, sending debris flying across the cavern floor. One of the younger women screamed as a sharp shard of stone caught her arm, sending blood spattering across the dust. Caleb moved without thinking, crossing the cavern in seconds and pulling the woman away from the entrance, using his own body to shield her from the wind and debris. The other women scrambled to reinforce the entrance, using saddles and blankets and anything else they could find to block the gap. When it was done, they stood panting in the sudden silence, and the young woman looked up at Caleb with eyes that held something new: respect, perhaps, or wonder. The eldest woman examined the wound on the young woman's arm, binding it with strips of cloth torn from her own clothing. When she was finished, she turned to Caleb, and her eyes were bright with something that looked almost like triumph. "You did not hesitate," she said. "You protected one of us without being asked, without waiting to see if there was something in it for you." Caleb shook his head, uncomfortable with the direction this was taking. Anyone would have done the same. The woman's smile widened. "No," she said softly. "They would not. We've been here for many months. We have seen others come to this place. They did not stay. They did not protect. They took what they wanted and left. You are different." She stood and faced the other women, who had gathered around them in a loose circle. "My sisters," she said, her voice carrying through the cavern despite the wind that still howled outside. "We have kept the old ways. We have waited for the sign, and now it has come." She turned back to Caleb, and her voice was firm, unyielding. "There is a prophecy among our people. It is old, older than the mountains, older than the desert itself. It says that when the great storm comes, a man will find this place. He will be alone. He will be afraid. And he will protect the sacred sisters without being asked. He will be the one who leads us home." Caleb stared at her, his mind racing. "I'm not a leader. I'm not a chief. I'm just a cowboy who got caught in a storm." The eldest woman shook her head slowly. "You do not understand. Our village was destroyed 6 moons ago. Soldiers came. They killed our men. They took our children. The 10 of us escaped, and we have been hiding in this place ever since. waiting for the prophecy to be fulfilled. Her voice cracked for the first time, revealing the grief she had been holding back. We cannot go back alone. We cannot face what lies ahead without a leader. The old ways demand it. The spirits demand it. Caleb looked around the circle of faces, young and old, scared and hopeful, all of them looking at him as if he held their fate in his hands. He wanted to refuse. He wanted to tell them they were wrong, that he was no one's savior, that he had spent his whole life running from responsibility. But as he looked at the young woman whose arm he had bound, at the blanket they had given him, at the stew they had shared when they had so little themselves, something inside him shifted. "I don't know anything about being a chief," he said slowly. "I don't know your language, your customs, your ways. I'm not the man you think I am." The eldest woman stepped forward and took his hands in hers. Her grip was strong, her eyes unwavering. "You are the man who came through the storm," she said. "You are the man who protected one of us without being asked. You are the man who stayed when others would have run." She looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. That is what a chief is. Not a man who knows everything. A man who does what is right when it is hard. She released his hands and stepped back, and as she did, the other women began to speak, their voices rising in a chant that was old and strange and somehow familiar all at once. The chant went on for several minutes, the women's voices weaving together in a harmony that seemed to fill the cavern, to fill the very air around them. Caleb stood frozen, not understanding the words, but feeling their meaning in his bones. When the chant ended, the eldest woman stepped forward again, and in her hand she held a simple leather cord, knotted and worn with age. "This was worn by the last chief of our people," she said. "He died defending our village. He had no son, no heir. The cord has been waiting for the one who would take his place." She raised the cord, and for a moment, she held it above Caleb's head. "Now, you are our chief." She placed the cord around his neck, and the weight of it was heavier than anything he had ever worn. The other women came forward one by one, each placing a hand on his shoulder, speaking words he did not understand, but somehow felt. When the last woman had stepped back, the eldest woman looked at him with tears in her eyes. "We have waited so long," she whispered. "So many nights of fear and hunger. And now, at last, we can go home." Caleb looked down at the cord around his neck, then at the faces of the 10 women who had placed their trust in a stranger. He did not feel like a chief. He felt like a man standing on the edge of something vast and unknown. The storm broke just before dawn. Caleb stood at the entrance of the cavern, watching the first light of morning paint the desert in shades of pink and gold. The world outside was transformed, washed clean by the rain, the air fresh and cool, the distant mountains sharp against the brightening sky. Behind him, the women were gathering their belongings, preparing to leave the place that had been their refuge for so long. The eldest woman came to stand beside him, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. "Where do we go?" Caleb asked finally. She pointed toward the east, where a thin thread of smoke rose against the sky. "Home," she said. "They think we are dead. They will not be expecting us. That is why we need you." Caleb looked at the smoke, then at the women behind him, then at the cord around his neck. He thought about the life he had been living, moving from town to town, belonging nowhere, answering to no one. It had been a safe life, a lonely life, a life that had asked nothing of him. Now, for the first time, something was asking. He turned to face the 10 women who had called him chief, who had given him a name and a purpose when they could have given him nothing. "Then let's go home," he said, and the words felt right in his mouth, felt like something he had been waiting to say his whole life. They walked out of the cavern together into the light of a new day 10 Apache women and the cowboy who had become their chief, and whatever waited for them in the east, they would face it together. The storm had passed, but something new had begun.